All right, guys, we're just going to get right into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to BabyCenter Answers, a live Q&A series addressing the most common parenting questions and topics by providing expert solutions to help you tackle parenting with confidence. Today, we're going to be talking about all things baby sleep, which we all want very much more of. I'm Olivia DeLong. I'm the senior health editor here at BabyCenter.com. I have a 3-year-old, so while I'm in the throes of toddlerhood, I very much remember how crazy the first year was when it came to her sleep. I am joined by Dr. Afolabi-Brown, who is a member of our medical advisory board and also the host of our BabyCenter sleep course. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited you're here too. Again, today we're going to talk about all things sleep routines, what to do about common mishaps. I know naps were a huge source of frustration for me as a new mom. And then we're going to provide some tips for daylight saving time at the end, which is coming up this weekend. But before we dive in, Dr. Brown, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown. I am a pediatric pulmonologist and a sleep medicine physician. And I'm also the founder of Restful Sleep MD. And really my focus is to empower busy moms and their children to prioritize sleep so they can reach their fullest potential. I'm a mama of 2 myself. My son's 14, my daughter's 11, but I could definitely tell you I know and I've been there, especially in those early stages of life when it was so difficult, but it does get better, I promise.
It does get better. I hesitate to say anything too much because anytime I talk about sleep, I'm like, she's not going to sleep well tonight. So, well, awesome. Thanks again for being here with us. So using the chat feature, we're going to be taking questions throughout the event. And then also, of course, we're going to do some rapid fire if there's time at the end, if that sounds good to you, Dr. Brown.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. So before we get into the nitty gritty of, those sleep routine and practices, the basics, the trouble spots, I think it's really important for us to address safe sleep practices. That's something that as a new mom, I kind of wasn't sure where to turn to for help with that. And I hear that you have some really easy ways for us to remember the safe sleep practices.
Yeah, absolutely. So the ABCD of safe sleep, I think, is just an acronym that's easy to remember. It's evidence-based, it's practical. And A really stands for alone. So a baby should sleep alone. And the American Academy of Pediatrics really does recommend against co-sleeping. And so that's important. Your baby should sleep alone, on their backs, in their crib or bassinet. And you should not smoke, so don't smoke. So A is alone, B is on their backs, C is that they should sleep in their crib or bassinet, and D stands for don't smoke. And I think this forms a very fundamental tenet when it comes to safe sleep in kids. You want to get it, you want to make sure they're safe, first of all, before we then start to build on all those other building blocks.
Right, thank you. That's so easy to remember, A, B, C, D. Okay. I know there's as a new parent, there's just so much to remember, but this is obviously one of the most important things. So I'm glad we started off with that before we dive into all of this other good stuff. I think that, a common question we get from our community on social is about sleep routines. And I think there's a lot to talk about here about who needs a sleep routine, at what age we're creating this sleep routine, especially in the first year. A newborn sleep is going to look a lot different than a 1-year-old sleep. Can you talk us through how you encourage, healthy sleep routines, kind of from the newborn stages to 6 months and then again to that 1-year mark?
Yeah, so, even though during that newborn phase, your child doesn't have a set schedule, right? They don't have a set circadian rhythm yet. And so trying to put them on a schedule will potentially become very frustrating for you. But you can start to build healthy routines right from the start. And of course, for a newborn, that's going to look really, really different from when your child starts to get a little bit older. So your baby may just have a time where, their bedtime routine may include, changing their diaper, feeding them, maybe some lotion, and even reading to them. Those are some basic routines that you can start to incorporate very early that will then start to help establish a better sleep foundation for them. Then, of course, as they get older and you have more of a set, sleep and wake schedule, then making sure that that bedtime routine is occurring probably about 30 minutes or so before bedtime. And so for a 6-month-old, still similar. If your child is going to take a bath or something of that sort, incorporating that, then you want to make sure that you are limiting screen time. Even for babies, it sounds it sounds very obvious, but even you as a parent using your phone or, the TV on in the background releases that blue light that can suppress melatonin. Remember, babies don't necessarily start producing melatonin until about 3 or 4 months of age. So by 4 to 6 months, they can be very reactive to that light. So you want to make sure the light is dim. You want to make sure you give them maybe a bath. If they have bath night, change them into their PJs or, put some lotion, change them into PJs. You want to then maybe read a book. It's not too early, right from the start, even if all it is just looking at pictures together, and then you want to put them into their crib to sleep. So I think those then start to maybe evolve a little bit as they get older, but most of the time, if you're able to embrace, the hygiene piece of it, the bonding and the education, and that's really helpful. One piece I should have mentioned also is nutrition, right? For most times, your baby may need to take, a bottle or be fed just before they go to sleep. I usually will encourage that feeding should take place just before you start their bedtime routine, ideally.
Okay. Great tips. I was just looking here, sleep cues, I think we hear a lot about, and how, as our baby, obviously newborns, we're gonna kind of take their sleep cues. Can you talk a little bit about taking sleep cues and what that would look like at the early stages of infancy?
Yes. So, for our babies, I think it's important that we listen to those cues. And cues are just essentially signals that your baby will give when they're ready for sleep. And that's really as simple as that. And for different babies, it looks different. You are the expert for your child. So really spending time with them will help you to know what exactly their cues are. For some babies, they may start to sort of look away. Some may start to rub their eyes. Some may start to fuss just a little bit. Some may have sort of redder sort of eyebrows and things like that. So those are some may start to clench and unclench their fists. So again, studying your baby as you start to pay attention. Wait, before they went to sleep, they were doing, they had this unique behaviors, and every baby is so different, and take advantage of that to know that, okay, my baby is ready to sleep. And so there you would right away start to get them ready to put them down in their crib, either for a nap or for whatever sleep period they have. Really, if we miss those sleep cues, it's okay. At least initially, just give yourself grace. If you miss it a lot, then that's when they start to get into that zone of being overtired. They may start to fuss much more and cry and things like that. So once you get a hang of this, it's so helpful for you to get a sense of when to put them down for their nap.
I love that. We were just talking about, what to do if your baby has to miss a nap last week. And, life happens. Every family has a different schedule. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, you have to do what works for your family. Not all babies are the same. I think it's really important to know that life is going to come up and you may not be able to do this elaborate routine every night, but that's okay. And to do it when you can, if that's something that works for you.
Absolutely.
So a really big piece of what we want to talk about today is like problems that come up with sleep. So sleep regressions, I feel like we hear that term all the time, mishaps, misnaps, babies not napping. So I want to spend a lot of time today talking about these trouble spots of sleep. because I think that that's what's on parents' mind. Like I mentioned, I felt like my baby was just never, ever napping when I needed that time to rest and recharge. So just, I'm going to just go through a few mishaps that are super common that we see over and over in our community on social. Let's see. The first one is sleep regressions. I think we can spend some time talking about sleep regressions. I know I just mentioned it, but I felt like every time I said, you know, my daughter's not sleeping, someone said, oh, it must be a sleep regression. Can you talk about what a sleep regression is? What's going on? Are they a thing? And what to do about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to just start off by saying whoever coined that name really makes it have this very negative connotation.
Agreed.
And when we look at sleep, regressions, which is what most people know them as, they may seem like setbacks, but it turns out they're just developmental changes that our babies are undergoing, right? Because our babies' sleep changes as they get older. And so things can happen, right? They're getting more aware of their environments. And so it seems like a sleep regression, but it turns out they're just more attuned to what's going on around them, and they have FOMO, fear of missing out, so they don't want to miss out, right? Or they may be teething, right? We want our babies to teeth, except it may come with some discomfort. Or they're starting to pull themselves up to stand from their crib, and so they want to get out of their crib. So first of all, I think it starts with that mindset of shifting it from, oh, this is a bad thing that's happening. No, it's your baby showing you that they are growing and they are developing normally. Of course, you can also have setbacks to their sleep if they're sick, right? If they're sick, yes, they will technically, regress in that sense. Or if there's a change in the family, or there's a travel or something like that, yes, that will make their sleep change. But when it comes to those developmental changes, let's embrace that as just their normal development. So I just wanted to start with that.
Yeah.
Now, we typically get those, quote and unquote regressions at around, the first one, usually people will say about 4 months of age, and then at about 6 months, somewhere around 10 months, 12 months, and then 18 months. That's usual, the typical times, but
That's a lot. I mean, it's like every few months, right?
It's like every time you turn around, once you start to feel like, oh, I got a hang of my baby's sleep.
Yep.
Nope. They're like, guess what? I'm going to throw you a curveball. So, but if you notice that, that's completely around where there's a milestone, right? They're starting to eat solids. They're starting to sit upright. They're starting to crawl. They're starting to, to walk. So you just have to see it as that. I think that really takes off the stress and know that, okay, maybe this is something I might expect. But then, of course, it's helpful for you to have some tools in place and to know what to anticipate in that sense. Now, another thing is you have to also realize that you're within the first 3 months of life, right? There are two main sleep stages that our babies are going through. There's what we call quiet sleep or active sleep. Those are the two main stages. And, in my world, we call it REM sleep and non-REM sleep in that sense. And then as they get to about 4 months or so, their brain waves start to develop, right? And so then they start to go into not just quiet sleep and active sleep, they start to go through light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep, which is the rapid eye movement sleep. Okay. Now, when they're going through those cycles of sleep, it's pretty short, about 45 minutes to an hour or so. So it's not unusual where people say, oh, yes, my child is suddenly waking up every hour on the hour. Yes, because they're cycling through those sleep stages and it's new for them. So sometimes they may have difficulties linking the sleep stages. That's one thing. And then sometimes when they're going through REM sleep, sometimes they are moving around or fussing a lot, and we as parents may run in to rescue them.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why I always say practice the pause, So if you notice your baby is starting to fuss, give them a moment, count, take some deep breaths for yourself. I know your stress level, your cortisol is rising as you're hearing them, but sometimes they may be able to connect the second sleep cycle and keep sleeping. So just give them a moment. So that's the first thing. And then the other piece you should pay attention to is what is going on at bedtime for your baby. Does your baby typically need you to fall asleep? If your baby needs rocking, if they need to be fed, if they need to be held for one reason or the other, most times when they're going through those normal sleep cycles, when they wake up and they notice like, oh, wait, when I was falling asleep, I had a bottle in my mouth. It's not there anymore. Or when I was falling asleep, my parents were rocking me and they're not doing that anymore. They're going to need that association to continue to continue with their sleep. So usually what I recommend is let's go back to the beginning of the night and try to teach them how to fall asleep independently. And once they can maintain that, then usually those either nighttime wake-ins, regressions and things like that improve. The third is really looking at their schedule, right? As they're getting older, the National Sleep Foundation has recommendations about the number of hours of sleep that our children get, adults as well, right? 7 to 9 for adults. Your newborn needs about 14 to 17 hours. So that's a lot of time. As they get older, they'll need anywhere from 12 to 16, and then it keeps getting less. So as your baby is getting older, really paying attention to say, is there a need for a change in their sleep schedule? Are they getting too much sleep during the day? And so they're done. And so at nighttime, they really don't need anymore. And in that case, that may be a time to say, okay, maybe it's time to drop a nap. Maybe it's time to change their bedtime and things like that. So those are some of, very important pieces that I think helps. And then our fourth one is, how about feeding? Are they full? Are they hungry? Right? I think that's really something that's important. Sometimes what our babies do, which is a very tricky one, is sometimes they're nursing just for what we call non-nutritive sucking, right? They're not necessarily hungry anymore. Or they are hungry and then they just feed just enough to take the edge off. And so they wake up again because they are truly hungry. So making sure that at bedtime, when you're feeding your baby, that they are getting a sort of fuller meal, so they're not waking up in the middle of the night hungry again. So those are just a few things that you may want to pay attention to, especially when your child's sleep is changing during that regression phase.
That's great to know that they are truly experiencing all sorts of changes, but there's also things we can do as parents sometimes to help with the sleep. So that was super helpful to hear and very reassuring, I hope, for parents. So we have lots of questions coming in about napping. So I want to start off with just some general napping tips, and then we'll get into maybe some specific questions from our parents here. Again, like I said, I felt like around the 6-month mark, my daughter just stopped napping, and it was just very hard because I needed that time. And I felt like she was very overtired. Can you just talk us through some of the common, problems you see with napping, and then just a few tips, and then we can get into some of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I say is good sleep begets good sleep. So to start off, fundamentally, you do want to make sure that your child is getting, of course, the bulk of their sleep as they get older. I mean, within the first 3 months, it's very erratic. You expect them to sleep all day, sometimes wake up all night, it's a little all over the place. But when we start to really make sure that our night sleep is, the best quality, usually their naps are better. That's one thing. And then I want also people to understand where with the napping, it varies by age, right? So within the first 3 months, most babies, they're napping all day. They may nap anywhere from 30 minutes to maybe an hour. If you're lucky, an hour and a half, that's still good. I don't want you to discard it, especially in that newborn phase. And then as they get older, they start to have, more time, sort of more consolidated naps. That's the ideal. If you have your child either having really short naps, that's one of the most frequent reason, or you have your child resisting naps, that's also another one where they're crying and things like that. There could be a whole lot of things going on. So maybe we'll talk about the either the short naps, because I hear that very frequently.
Yeah, we actually have a question about someone has a baby that's 6 months old and she has several naps during the day, about 30 minutes each, and she's wanting her child to have, longer naps, a 3-nap sleep schedule. Yeah,
that's a great one. So when it comes to naps, there's this phenomenon, really. The reason why children need naps is because they have a sleep pressure or sleep drive That is very short. And what's a sleep drive? A sleep drive is what really drives you to want to sleep. So for each and every one of us, we wake up at a certain time, and then we start to feel sleepy as time goes, right? And so between the time when you wake up and then you sleep again is your wake period, right? Or your wake window and things like that. And so this over the course of time increases. There's different things that can guide how your child or how long your child is meant to be awake for, right? Again, one is, paying attention to their sleep cues. When you look online, there's so much variability around these wake windows, right? Some people will say, newborns is 35 to 60 minutes. Some people will say, around 2 to 4 months, it's about 1.5, about, maybe an hour to an hour and a half, thereabout. So there's a lot of variability, but I want you to understand that you have to, most importantly, pay attention to your baby. If your child is taking really, really short naps, one, it may be that, different reasons. One, it may be that they are either not tired enough or they're too tired. And so again, really trying to adjust their wake period based on them is going to be important. Two is also, are they hungry? So if your child wakes up, initially we talk about that, like eat, play, sleep kind of thing. So you want to make sure that between when they go down for a nap, that there's not too long a period from when they last ate, because you don't want them waking up in the middle of a sleep cycle because they're hungry. So that's another thing you want to pay attention to. If you have a newborn or a younger child who falls asleep on the breast, try to get them to kind of wake up so they are taking as full a meal as possible. So that's one other thing that I would recommend. And then also, I think really, really making sure that the environment where they're sleeping is really, you pay a lot of attention to. Now, within the first 3 months of life, your newborn can sleep anywhere. They'll sleep on your chest, they'll sleep on they'll sleep in the living room, they'll sleep in the bassinet, in the family room, they'll sleep everywhere. But as they get older, remember, they now start to develop more of the lighter stages of sleep. They become more sensitive to things going on around. So you want to make sure that the sleep environment is optimized. So your baby you may want to move them to where they sleep at night. So in their own bedroom, in their crib, in a room that is dark, with a white noise machine, and having a routine as well in place would also help them with making sure that they stay asleep. So I think those are a few things. Sometimes it's really, of course, there may be some unique things to each and every baby. But those are just off the top of my head, some things I would say consider. And then another important one is make sure your baby doesn't have any underlying medical condition. If your baby is fasting because they have reflux, yes, they're going to wake up very frequently. So you want to make sure that that's not the case.
It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We just have to adjust as they get older, and there's going to be times, it's like all of a sudden my daughter just started napping. Great, and it's like we have to sometimes remember that things do get better, like you mentioned before, but that there are some things we can do in the moment. Super helpful. Yeah, lots of questions coming in about napping. I think we probably covered how to get your baby to nap. Anything else about getting the daytime sleeping? Anything else you want to say there?
Yeah. One other thing I would say is sometimes your baby may be too tired. So in some situations, people would be like, you know what, maybe if I make them a little bit more tired, then they will nap longer. And I'm just of the school of thought that you shouldn't, because what happens when they're overtired, their stress levels go up, their cortisol rises. And what that ends up doing is it actually makes their sleep more fragmented. So again, study this. If you're noticing that this is a pattern, sometimes just log in their sleep for about a week or so, get a sense of, okay, what is going on? What's their behavior before they eventually, nap? What are the things, what's going on? How long are they napping for? And that will help you to adjust, to get a sense of, okay, at this point, I really need to start getting the routine ready for their nap. I need to start getting them into their bedroom and things like that. So I feel like sometimes getting some data, especially if you're noticing that this is something that's been going on for a while, that would inform you to know what exactly you would need to do in terms of making those changes.
I think I remember writing down for a few months kind of like how she was doing, when she was sleeping, when she was eating, when she was most active. And that was super helpful to bring to our pediatrician as well, to just kind of talk through how things were going. So that could be one way. Okay, let me just see if we have any more napping questions in here. Okay, let's move on, and then we'll come back to some of these are about spitting up in the bed and things like that. So let's come back to that. But I think kind of going on the napping and nighttime waking topic, which we'll address next. A lot of questions coming in about babies who won't settle down when they are being put in their crib or a bassinet and they just want to be held. I hear that from a lot of my friends who have newborns right now. They can't put their baby down. Can we talk through like why that might be and what are some things parents can do?
Yeah, no, that's great. There are a few reasons why that could happen. Again, it may be that your baby is overtired, and so they feel extra stimulated. And so one of the things that has helped me, even as a parent of a preteen and a teenager, is practicing the pause.
Yes.
I promise you, if you can learn not to be reactive, and our babies feed off of that as well, because you see your baby, writhing, back arching, they're fussing, and you want to just help them so quickly. And sometimes that's actually the time when they just need you to be calm so that they can be calm. And that's when they need you not to move around too much, not to try to stimulate them because they're already overstimulated. So when you take a breath, they will take a cue from that. So that's one thing I always recommend. It's very stressful, right? So being overtired, again, so work your way forward and pay attention to those. Again, those cues are like magic. It's incredible how freeing they can be, because then you could be more proactive and not reactive. So that's number one. And then number two, you can teach them especially if your baby is within the first 3 months, shushing them, gently moving them around and trying to calm them. Taking them to a dark room is really helpful, where there's not lights and distractions. That's so overstimulating for them. So that's helpful. And then also, again, starting to practice putting them down while they're still awake is so important, because if they've been so used to falling asleep on your arms, when you put them down and they wake up, they're gonna get upset, like, no, don't do that, don't leave me. So start to learn to put them down when they're full, they're content, the diaper is dry, just kind of laying them down to spend time. And it may be, you may need to start off with 5 minutes or whatever, especially if you have a much younger baby. And then again, if they're fussing, shushing them, patting them in their crib, and then gradually stepping away from there, I think is really helpful.
I love that process because it can be overwhelming to leave them there, obviously. So this is a great transition to help them fall asleep on their own. I think that's like one of those tough things, especially as a new mom, that I was like, oh, they're crying, it's easy to just go right in. Great. So thank you for those tips. Again, lots of questions coming in about that, and then nighttime waking. So just tons of questions coming in about nighttime wakings, and a lot having to do with feeding. So let's see. So I guess to just start, can you walk us through what nighttime feedings kind of look like, or nighttime wakings for feedings should look like in that first year, and how it kind of progresses? And then I think we've got some specific questions coming from parents here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I want you to realize is that we all wake up in the middle of the night. So technically, when people talk about sleeping through the night, it's not necessarily a thing. We all have very brief arousals in the middle of the night. Everyone, about 4 to 6 awakenings. Remember, we're cycling through stages of sleep. And the issue is not about waking up in the middle of the night. It's more about what do I need to fall back asleep? So the main issue that, of course, I know most moms and parents are worried about is the fact that it's hard for their babies to fall back asleep without either a parental presence or a bottle or things like that. So at the end of the day, within those first, again, 3-4 months, actually, your baby waking up to feed is completely normal in the middle of the night, because they have very small stomachs and they're growing very, very rapidly. So yes, they will probably wake up quite frequently then. But here is something that you could do to help at least that stage of life. And that is making sure that they are full before they go to bed. They are full before they go to bed, yet you're not putting them asleep with a bottle. So it's tricky. So the reason why is when they are full before they go to bed, rather than, they just, took a few sips of the bottle or breast milk and then, they fall asleep, you want to make sure they're satiated, right? So that's important. And then you also want to make sure that they don't develop what you call a sleep association or a crutch, where they are needing the bottle to fall back asleep when they wake up in the middle of the night. So I think that's a balance you want to start to juggle even earlier on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Okay.
And then if you now have a child who, usually babies may still wake up once or twice in the middle of the night to feed up to about 6 months. If your pediatrician says it's okay for your baby to not feed at night, and then you now want to start weaning them off, the nighttime feeds, then we can have a gradual process by which you do that. But if your baby is waking up every hour for a bottle or every hour for a feed, I can almost assure you they're not necessarily hungry. They're probably just in the cycle where they're using that as a, just as a pacifier pretty much. So then this is where, again, focusing on the beginning of the night, teaching them to fall asleep without a bottle will help when they wake up in the middle of the night.
Okay, super helpful. I was just looking at this question from a community mom, which kind of goes with what you were just saying. When can you stop the night feed? So obviously it will vary from baby to baby, and you should definitely talk to your pediatrician. But do you have, can you just talk a little bit more about when the night feedings can stop and when your baby can start sleeping through the night?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, from about 4 to 6 months, your baby is ready to sleep through the night.
Okay.
But if you have a baby with medical condition, which is why we partner with our pediatricians, if you have a baby that has reflux, if you have a baby and maybe needs frequent feedings, if you have a baby that has difficulties with growing and things like that, your pediatrician may actually say, yeah, I want you to continue to feed them. But about 4 to 6 months, your baby can sleep through the night and doesn't necessarily need, again, barring any medical conditions, that nighttime feed. But another thing you can do, even if your baby still needs that little extra help, one thing you can actually practice is dream feeding. And I think that's just been such a lifesaver. And so the way this is usually somewhere around 2 months or so. Again, work with your pediatrician because your specific situation is unique. And what that is literally you feed your baby, you do your routine, you put them to sleep, say maybe, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever. And then when you are about to go to bed, you nudge them. So you are controlling that, right? You nudge them awake, not fully, but kind of like a little bit drowsy, and you give them a bottle. So you are in charge. And you feed them again, sort of to fill the tank. And that's what we call a dream feed. So they're not fully awake, but enough to take the bottle, and then they go back to sleep. And that really should last them for the rest of the night without them necessarily developing that association we're usually worried about. So that's one trick that can help in some situations.
Great. So I'm reading another question here. I noticed that when my son learns something new or is developmentally growing, he gets more hungry throughout the night, waking up every 1 to 2 hours to eat. Would you recommend to keep feeding him until he's satisfied? You kind of addressed that, and we're not sure how old this child is, but any other thoughts on that? Going through developmental,
Yes. I think one of the things is, I see, especially the baby is how old did she say?
We don't know how old the baby is, no.
Okay. I suspect that's probably a baby that's older than 3-4 months, right? And
Mhm.
again, they're becoming very aware of their environment. So they may just be looking around and not necessarily participating in that feed. So really being in, when you're feeding them, make sure that you're feeding them in a place that's free of distraction so they can focus. Your job, dear baby, is to feed right now. So they can focus and get the
Yeah.
full
No
meal.
distractions.
No distraction. So when they're satiated, when they're full, then most of the time they're probably not hungry when they're waking up in the middle of the night. They may just either need you or something of that sort. And that's why they're waking up. And we could address those nighttime wakings by making sure they're not falling asleep on the bottle, they're not falling asleep with you rocking them, or those kind of sleep crutches or associations.
It's hard as a new parent, but they are, if you want to get sleep, these are some of the things you have to do. As far as also, I think I saw a question here. Yeah, my baby spits up a lot while sleeping. Could you talk
Yeah.
a little bit about what might be going on there?
Yes, that's again, I am a physician, not your physician, right? So
Right.
definitely touch base with your pediatrician, but I would say that that's really common. And one of the most common reasons is overfeeding. Again, we think my baby wakes up, my baby looks uncomfortable, my baby is crying, they must be hungry. And so we overfeed them. So that's a huge reason why a lot of babies wake up with spit ups, right? That's one. Another reason may be that they have reflux, gastroesophageal reflux, because, they're sort of what we call our esophagus, which takes the food down to their stomach. Sometimes the sphincter there, or the valve there, is a little bit more loose in babies. And so, especially again, if they're feeding a lot, that things will tend to come up. Could be very uncomfortable and can wake them up. So in some situations, your pediatrician may provide medication. In many situations, they may provide just some really practical strategies to decrease that reflux and make them more comfortable. But frequent spitting up, those are the two main things. As long as your baby is also not ill, right? They don't have some, medical illness that's making them throw up. But those are two common reasons.
Definitely something parents should always let their pediatrician know about so
Yeah.
they can kind of troubleshoot and work through it. Super
Mm.
helpful. This is more about safe sleep, but since we already addressed it, I'll ask here. My 4-month-old is starting to roll over in his sleep and sometimes rolling to his tummy. Should I roll him back and should I be worried?
Great question. Your 4-month-old is growing in leaps and bounds, very, very normal. What we recommend, if, say, for instance, you're awake, is putting them on their back, right? We talked about the ABC, so alone on their back, so that's important. You can put them back on their back, but know that they probably will roll back to their tummies. You don't need to stay up all night trying to flip them over. That's you don't need to do that at all. But what I would recommend is, if they're in that situation during the day, make sure you practice some tummy time, so they can start practicing, right, exercising those core muscles and learning how to roll both ways. Making sure that your crib is safe. There should be nothing in that crib. There should be no bumpers, no stuffed toys, no blankets, nothing of that sort. If you have a baby that's already starting to roll, get them out. And they were swaddled, you definitely don't want to swaddle them anymore after that, right? Because that causes suffocation risk. So don't stay up all night trying to flip them over. If you're awake, you can flip them over to their back, but that doesn't mean, that's not something you need to worry about.
Okay, good to know. I remember when my daughter started doing that, I was like focused on the monitor every second, and you worry as a parent, but good. Those are good things to know. Another question that just came in, which I think is great. Can you just define a little bit more about what it means to sleep through the night? And maybe that differs from newborn to a 1-year-old. Is that 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours? Could you just go through sleeping through the night?
So, when people talk about sleeping through the night, most people are saying things like 12 midnight to about 6 a.m. It's still not, especially for your much younger baby, and, who may be waking up to feed. But ideally, sleeping through the night in our sense of the word is from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay.
And every baby is different, but your child can learn to do it. It does take some, some intentionality and things, and, a little bit of work in that sense. Some babies, you may just be lucky that they just wake up one day and they sleep through the night. Some people are lucky that way. But sometimes we may need to, teach them to sleep independently for us to be able to achieve that.
Okay, great. So another question, also great, is when my 6-month-old wakes up in the night, she seems to go from 0 to hysterical in an instant, making it really hard to teach the self-soothing. Is there anything I can do to fix this?
Oh, that is hard.
Yeah.
So I think it's trying to figure out, how did she fall asleep at bedtime? Again, it's back to that, because in the middle of the night, there's really no learning, right? Everybody's exhausted. Your baby's probably maybe tired as well, and she's just pissed off that she woke up, and the condition she fell asleep in is gone, which is, I was rocked. How dare you do this to me, right? So she's pissed off. So what we're going to work on is, again, getting her to fall asleep independently at bedtime, so that when she wakes up, even briefly in the middle of the night, she's like, oh, the last time I fell asleep, I was alone in my crib, comfortable, happy, safe. I'm going to just continue to link my sleep and go back to bed. So again, most of the time I recommend focusing on that, middle of the night, beginning of the night. And of course, making sure there's no, she doesn't have a very dirty soaked diaper. And, she said, well, she's not hungry and things like that as well.
Okay, awesome. This one is kind of still going along the same lines of nighttime sleep. How do I put my baby to sleep without his bottle if he cries immediately upon laying him down in the crib? So we've got, how do you, navigate all that?
Yeah. So I think one of the things for most of us is, first of all, reassure yourself, if your baby has had their last bottle, maybe about 30 minutes, depending on their age, before bedtime, they're not hungry, and you have to convince yourself before you can convince your baby otherwise.
I love that.
So,
I love that.
They're not hungry.
Okay.
It's become just something they're used to. So we may want to maybe replace one crutch for another. So in that case, maybe getting a pacifier or something is fine, because that's something you could take away later. It's much easier. And then also, putting them, again, it may take some time, reassuring them, shushing them, patting them, being calm is so important, because they, again, feed off of us. And your baby will protest. If you think about it, we're telling them, you needed this to fall asleep, but I want to teach you to be an independent sleeper. In the same way, if your baby is learning to walk, right, and they trip and fall the very first time they take their first step, we're not going to just scoop them up and say, oh, you're never supposed to walk again. Yeah. No, right? Yeah. We're going to check in. Are you okay? Okay, you're okay. You could do this, right?
Reassuring. Yeah.
Reassuring them. And that's what you'll do. But again, the work really is with us, because of course we wouldn't protest. But once you've been able to work on that mindset, you'll be able to support them through that journey to helping them sleep independently.
Wonderful. Okay, this one is, and this will be the last one, and then we'll move on to the next topic, but we have twinkle lights hanging over the window in our baby's room. How important is it to keep the room dark? I think it's super important to talk about keeping the room dark. So go for it, Dr. Brown.
Yes. So my recommendation, honestly, depending on the age of your baby, again, if they're very, they're at that age where they're really exploring, sometimes that may disrupt their sleep. If you have a baby who has the twinkle lights on and is able to fall asleep, stay asleep, and everybody is at peace, you don't need to do anything. It's fine. Okay. But most times, if you notice that either your baby is waking up early in the morning or waking up frequently in the middle of the night, again, especially if your baby is over 4 months old, the reason might be because their brain is sensing that light, and the brain's melatonin production kind of pauses, because melatonin in your brain responds to light, any kind of light. It doesn't know whether it's daylight or artificial light. It just sees light and says, oh, it's time to wake up. So if that's what you're noticing, they're waking up early or they're waking up frequently, then you probably want to use something different. Definitely not above their heads.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those things where if it's working fine, go for it. But if not, then might want to change something up. Okay, so I think we should move on to early wake ups. I think this is probably something that a lot of parents, not just in the first year, can relate to. But we had some questions come in on our Instagram page about a baby going down at normal time and waking up at 4 a.m. Can you just talk about why our babies might wake up early and any other tips you have to help that?
Yeah, so again, there's so many reasons why, similar to why our babies would have frequent wake-ups in the morning. There are several reasons why our babies might wake up early, ranging anywhere from light exposure to early light exposure. I think we're gonna talk a little bit about daylight saving soon, but even that alone, right? If there's light streaking in from anywhere, and when I say anywhere, it's anywhere. So even if you think your baby's room is completely dark, there might be a light switch on. There might be, the lights on their noise machine or humidifier, whatever. Even that little streak of light sometimes, especially in the early hours of the morning, when our kids are now in sort of closer to the lighter stages of sleep, that in and of itself can trigger an awakening. That's one thing I just want people to know. It's very common. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Another one may be that they may need a change in their schedule. They may have had too much sleep during the day, whereby they're done. So it may be a time where your baby needs to drop a nap. So if you have, say, for instance, a 6-month-old, they may not need 4 naps anymore. You may be going down to 3 naps. So you want to just look at their sleep schedule to figure that out. And then another one could be that they are, again, not tired enough. And if they're not tired enough, meaning that maybe they're napping way too much during the day, then they'll be done at 4 a.m. So again, making an adjustment to their schedule. Or also overtired. So your baby may crash because they're overtired, but then it turns out for some reason they may wake up early because they were overtired. So making an adjustment and making sure you have that sweet spot is also very important. And then could they be hungry? So making sure that they're well fed before bedtime is also something that's important. So I think those are a few. And then of course an association. Did they fall asleep with someone in the room with them? And now they're waking up and they need that same person, that same caregiver to be present for them to go back to sleep.
One thing that came to mind, even with my own daughter who's 3, but I feel like when we put her down later, she wakes up earlier. And I know that that's a common question too. Does that still happen in the first year some, if that's the case?
It happens through all stages of life, even in adults. Because people are like, oh, wait, I want to sleep in and I can't, so I'm going to go to bed later. Sometimes you just find out you're waking up even earlier. And so if you want to shift the schedule, you can very, very gradually. Again, in a situation where you have a really, really small baby, it may look like trying to keep them in the room, make sure the room is very nice and dark. Don't, try to stall as much as possible so they stay in that dark environment till 4:15 or 4:30, instead of going right in to get to them right away, because that also creates this reward system where they're like, oh, wait, the day starts at 4 a.m. in this house. Let's party, right? So you want to set the rules in that sense. No, the day does not start at 4 a.m.
4 a.m. is not when mommy and daddy are going to be waking up.
No, we're not. Exactly. So again, you can make some adjustments to that, depending on what strategies you feel comfortable with, to get them to stay in bed longer. But I would recommend those troubleshooting points I gave initially would be definitely something to start with.
Okay, great. So before we close with daylight saving time, I want to ask some rapid fire that's coming in from the audience here. We've been asked a bunch about how to transition from a bassinet to a crib, which I think is a great question.
Yeah, that's really, for every baby is different. Usually by about 3 to 4 months, if your baby is already outgrowing the the crib, or I'm sorry, the bassinet, it would be time to. And so, you being present, depending on what you set a date, you put them in again, alone on their backs, alone on their backs in their crib. And you can decide if, of course, they may fuss initially because this looks like there's a lot more space, and you can try to, help them to self-soothe. You may need to pat them to sleep initially, and then slowly start to fade yourself away from their bedtime, pretty much.
Okay, great. I remember, I think we kind of did the napping. We first started with naps in the crib, and then kind of like to transition all. So it just depends on your baby. There's a lot of questions coming in about sleep sacks and swaddling, and how long, it's safe to let baby sleep, and, in those types of things. And then also about baby sleeping in the same room when it's not safe to do that anymore. So sleep sacks, and then is there a time where it's not okay for the baby to sleep in the same room?
Great questions. So with the sleep sacks, first swaddles, really you can continue until your baby starts rolling, right? Okay. So that's one, and then you transition them to a sleep sack. I can assure you that I have toddlers who are still in sleep sacks.
Okay.
Perfect. Because they can't hop out of their crib. It's beautiful.
If it's working, then I feel like, yeah.
Yes. So there's no, really, honestly, you don't have to set an end. Of course, if they've outgrown it, you could get bigger ones, or, if you have a toddler who can still sleep, I have a lot, because with a sleep sack, you don't need extra blankets and things like that. It serves its purpose as a blanket as well. And so I think that's my thought about that.
Okay.
When it comes to room sharing, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends up to about 6 months, but really at the end of the day, I make this very individualized. What works for you? Most parents that I know don't necessarily enjoy having their adorable little one in the bedroom till, sometimes by 3 months they're done. Some from the hospital, they have them in their room. So what works for you? Room sharing is recommended, because that way you still feel the closeness, especially within the first 6 months of life. If you need to feed them, you can do all that. Bed sharing, absolutely not. Co-sleeping, absolutely not. But usually about 6 months. But don't guilt yourself. If your baby is 2 months old and you're noticing that as a parent, it's completely wrecking your sleep, and you need them to be in their own room, that's a skill you're giving them. You're empowering them to be independent sleepers. And guess who benefits as well? You do. So it's something that, find what works for your own family and stick to it within the context of safety.
Okay, great. And then a few questions coming in, both about sound machines and then night lights, whether they're, with a sound machine, and I sometimes wonder about this too, will the baby become dependent on the sound machine? And then night lights, are they good, bad? If you could just talk through those two things.
Yeah, sure. So with sound machines, babies, it tends to work really well because of that shushing sound. I mean, it's kind of similar to the shushing sound of the placenta when the baby was, not born yet. And so, having a sound machine, especially within those first few months, tends to be helpful for most. Number one, it masks out any outside noise, right? If you are in a noisy neighborhood, if you have, other younger children that may end up making noise and disrupting your baby, having a sound machine is actually very, very helpful. If you're at the point where you do feel like you want to start to get your child not to use the sound machine, you can do this gradually. You can use, a timer and have it go off at a certain time, and then slowly but surely start shortening the time off. It works. I can tell you that I have toddlers that still use the sound machine.
I was going to say, my daughter, we love her sound
exactly
machine. And we have a sound machine to sleep as well.
Exactly. I mean, talk about even as an adult, you may have a fan in your room that you need to be on constantly. Sometimes we all just don't really like the complete silence. So I think it's fine. Then in terms of night light, honestly, for a baby, within the first 2 years of life, I don't necessarily think they need a night light. Again, As they get older, they may start to have nightmares. They may start to have bedtime fears. Having a nightlight is helpful. If you're there and you're going in to feed them, then of course, having a nightlight, so you're not bumping your way to the crib, I think that's helpful. The important thing is you want to make sure that it's not bright at all and it's out of their eyesight. So they're not looking at it directly. So maybe somewhere, below the crib or something. So it's just giving enough light for you to know where you're headed. And then we go back to, is it affecting your child's sleep? If you're noticing that they're waking frequently or they're waking up early, that's the first thing that should go.
Okay, great to know. Especially great to know about the sound machine, because I don't want to get rid of that.
No.
Okay, so we're almost at time. So I want to wrap up quickly with some tips on navigating daylight saving time. So we are springing forward this weekend. And I know, as you know, even as a mom with a toddler, we all just kind of dread this, right? Because we're losing an hour of sleep, or in the fall, we're gaining an hour. Can you talk through maybe your top 3 tips for, that first year dealing with daylight saving time with the baby?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for the first 3 months, it doesn't matter because they don't have a circadian rhythm. The reason why it's such a disruptor is that change of the social clock relative to our internal clock, right? Newborns don't have that. So you should be good with that. If you, of course, as your child is getting older, what they are going to do is lose, an hour of sleep. Interestingly enough, that change in daylight saving is actually easier on our little ones' bodies because most times they're early risers anyway, right? Compared to like teenagers or older children, for instance. But as parents, there are a few things you can do to just optimize things. One is making sure that they're getting adequate sleep as much as possible for at least maybe a week or so leading up to daylight saving. 2, if you do decide you want to do something, and again, I'm not mandating this, it's that it will make it easier on your body, it will make it easier on your child's body. But if you're able to do this, then one of the things I recommend is gradually shifting the time. So gradually shifting bedtime and wake up time. So what does this look like? Say, for instance, today or tomorrow, you want to start moving bedtime about 10 to 15 minutes earlier. So if the typical bedtime is maybe 7 p.m., then you want to move it back to 6:45. And then tomorrow you'll move it to, 6:30 gradually, so that by the time you get to Saturday, they're just going to wake up at the normal time. So that's usually good. And then the third is use light to your advantage. So what does that look like? You want to get out there, you want to expose yourself to natural light as much as possible. So early in the day, and then in the evening, right, it's still going to be bright out, right? You want to start to wind down and avoid bright light. You want to dim the lights in the house. You want to limit device use about 2 hours before bedtime. So that way their internal clock starts to kick in to say, yes, it's bedtime. So those are my top 3 tips.
Those are awesome. I want to use those for myself this time.
I think we should, as adults. We definitely need that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, is there anything else? We have about a minute before I have to close. Anything else you want parents to know about sleep?
Well, just to let you know that, again, you're doing the best you can.
Yeah.
You are the mom, you are the dad for the job, you are the parents for the job. And you're not alone. I think one of the things I personally had BabyCenter really walk me through right from the minute I knew I was pregnant until I stopped. I don't even, maybe I still even get the emails. My kids are
probably.
And it's the resources are there. There's such a huge community there. So there's a lot you can leverage. So you're not doing this alone because it's hard. It's hard, but it's very, very worth it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Brown. I feel like we can talk about sleep for hours more, so we're definitely going to have a follow-up event. And we just really want to thank everyone today for joining BabyCenter Answers, especially you, Dr. Brown. You're just so full of knowledge, and it's been great working with you, even on articles for BabyCenter. So this has been so fun. And I want to thank my BabyCenter team for helping out as well. And thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll see you, at the next event.